Things are going to start happening to me now.
You've done all the reading. You're a scholar. You're a professor. You've done all the reading. You've done the intellectual heavy lifting.
More or less, eat shit and die.
You wouldn't know a fact if it begged you all night long.
Want to give the wrong impression, because I am very high.
Ran up behind him with a hatchet. Smash, smash, smash.
Yeah. Care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Joe Jorgensen.
That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
It's happening, folks. Thaddeus Russell is in the building. We can start this podcast. Thanks for showing up. So look, this is a Libertarian Podcast Review podcast, but the great thing I get to do is interview people as well, which I love. So I did a show on Thad, having a conversation with people. I met Nick Gillespie at the Reno convention, and it was great. Is a guy that I feel like I could have a conversation with out in a normal life and thoroughly enjoy it. You're one of those kind of people too, but it's odd to just Zoom and have a conversation with people. So this is kind of like porn and prostitution, where you add a camera and suddenly it's okay in mass dissemination. So here we are. We're Thaddeus, why is your career so bad that you've come on this podcast?
I'm just honored to be porn and prostitution. That's all. Thank you for that. What was the question?
why is your career so bad that you've slummed it to the depths of the Libertarian Podcast Review?
That's what I'm saying. This is the greatest honor, man. It's the opposite of what you're saying. Don't deride yourself.
I'm self-deprecating.
I somehow, yeah, you are. Somehow I didn't know about that review you did of my show, which was I think more than a year ago.
Yeah.
And it just popped up somehow. I saw it somewhere and I watched it just like last week, I think. And as I told you before we started rolling here, I was blown away because I think you spent an entire hour and you really went through it and you really analyzed it and yes, you said nothing but positive things. So certainly that's part of why I'm here, but it was really more that you get it. You really get what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do many things with the podcast, and some things I don't make explicit, but you sort of figured it out. And I just really appreciated that. Like it just means a lot because the podcast is the thing in my whole career of all the things I've done. In terms of work, it's the thing I'm proudest of because it represents all of me. It's not just my scholarly side. It's not my academic side. It's not just my political side or my intellectual side. As you know, I talk a lot about myself. I talk a lot about feelings, emotions, psychology, background, parents, childhood, all that stuff with myself and the guests.
Yeah.
And then I try to weave that into the politics to try to better understand why we think the way we do about politics. And but also, I just think that's the stuff that is most powerful and memorable. I think what people remember about my show is those personal moments when people say things they've never said elsewhere, and they reveal themselves and they're vulnerable with me. And those are the moments I remember, and those are the moments that are gold for me. But then, you also get sort of how I try to do the interview. I mean, interviewing I take very seriously as a craft, and I've worked on it a lot. And actually you spent most of the time talking about the earlier shows, which was 5 years ago now. Which when I listen to them now, I certainly like them generally, but I hear things that I don't like and I try to correct them. But I've been working on it for a long time. I pay attention to interviewers and how they do interviews, and I try to be good at it. And it's something I didn't know that I had a gift for until I started doing this. I thought I'd be okay, but I didn't know that I would really have a really special sort of feeling for it. And so it's been really gratifying for me in so many ways. Then the politics, you most certainly get the politics. You made it clear that I do not identify as a libertarian and that I have significant differences with libertarians while being very, very close to libertarians on many, many issues. So Tyler, thank you again. It's you really understand me. You see me.
Well, your message that you sent to me was something you could put on a dust jacket of a book, or I guess this podcast, which is, you did a good review and you did it correct. That's what it was great. So for me, and I got a litany of things to talk to you about today. And so once again, thanks for coming on here. But with some interesting parts is I found your podcast kind of when I came out of the right wing, really decided I'm no longer part of that. And I was going through the liberty side, and I found yours because it was Camille, I think Camille, I found him. And then, there's something referencing. So I found you early on. And then obviously Michael Malice was your first episode, and it blew my mind. Maybe I'll just skip right forward. And one of the reasons is being kind of the right winger, but always being in the liberty space of, I knew some of Bastiat and I'd read some of these things early on, but coming into it later in my life, I held on to some later principles. And one of those things that kind of moved me through or had a problem with was the Vietnam War. As a right winger, it's a war that, we didn't do correctly and we should have done harder. And the other side was always the Little Red Book of Mao and Jane Fonda, which kind of how you see this. So it's that. And then the other side, which the Green Beret movie with John Wayne type of thing, right? So I end up watching the Vietnam War documentary, and I saw this enlisted guy who wasn't a lefty, and he was he hated the war, but he also hated Jane Fonda, and it blew my mind. And then I kind of got into this. So I guess for me, it was interesting to finally see some of the liberty side that didn't hate capitalism. And also wasn't necessarily, about just the lefty side of it. So, we've got someone coming in. Red flag law coming in.
No, got a wind coming in. No,
okay.
No worries. Not the cops, just the wind. Okay.
Right. So anyway, finding your show was a very good help for me. And then you've obviously had a bunch of guests. What was your goal when you first started the show, and have you been able to stay true to that goal? And how has it changed?
One of the things you noticed is also that I have probably the most diverse set of guests ideologically that you will find in the media. I've never seen a show with a wider array of ideologies among my guests. I mean, I have many, many socialists and Marxists and communists and a few liberals. I tend not to be as interested in liberals, but I even had a goddamn one of the staff writers for the New York Times this year on my show. He did not know what was going on when he came on, but I've had everybody. And then of course I've had many libertarians and lots of paleos of various sorts. I've had a couple people who are outright fascists and race realists, and so it's everybody. Some really great Christian conservatives like Anthony Easelin. I always talk about him. I love that episode. It's really across the board. So that I've stayed true to, it's ecumenical and maybe even more ecumenical now than it was when I started. It's pretty libertarian heavy at the beginning, but if you look at the last 50 guests I've had, you would have no idea what my own politics are. You would have no clue. If you just looked at the guest list, not a clue.
Yeah.
So that, yes, doing it by Zoom, which I started during the pandemic, used to be totally in person. All of my interviews were in person, audio only. And that was really wonderful in that it fosters a tremendous intimacy.
Yeah.
And so, especially with what I'm trying to do with getting people to talk about stuff that they normally don't talk about, made that a lot easier. I still have been able to do that. It's just not quite as amenable to my project. Eventually I'm going to go do more in-person interviews, but at the same time, Zoom has also allowed me to interview people all across the world. And, I had Alexander Dugin on from Moscow, right. That was only Zoom would allow that, and lots of people. So, I'm proud of it still, and I'm still doing what I want to do with it.
So one of the questions was going to be how COVID changed that. And I know you started to do video. Matter of fact, your Abby Martin one was very well produced. It looked like you've kind of stepped away from that. You're going to go back out on the road to kind of do the shows, or are you trying to focus more on kind of the other stuff, and this is just something you can supplement it with?
Yeah, well, we've done live events. We did a big one in Texas last year, and I did 5 or 6 interviews there. So that was in person.
Yeah.
We are going to have, I don't know if I should announce this now, but we are going to have Actually, why not? Yeah, we are about to announce an unregistered weekend in Chicago, which is October 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. And that'll be featuring two guys everyone listening knows. Curtis Yarvin and Jack the Perfume Nationalist will be there. And I'll be interviewing them a lot. And those will be in person, obviously. And those will become podcast episodes. And people who come can talk and they can be part of the Q&A and discussion and hang out with Jack and Curtis throughout the weekend. So save the date, October 21st, 23rd, Chicago, Illinois. But yeah, so I'm going to do more of that.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say I'm going to do as much interviews in person as I can. I'm in the Bay Area right now, and there are people here I'm going to interview. And yeah, so I mean, money and time allowing, I will do that as much as I can. Yeah.
So I'm just on the other side of Sacramento, so we're actually pretty close here. So
where are you exactly?
Folsom.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Johnny Cash. There you go.
Johnny Cash. That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So if you're over here by the prison, we can say hi. So let's talk about, you wrote a book, The Renegade History of the United States. You're in the process of writing a new book. Are you doing it like the Michael Malice self-publishing? You going through a publisher? What's the status of that? And I know it's been in the works for several years now.
Okay. So the story with that is that it's now 11 years ago. I, with my agent, pitched a book to all the major publishers in New York. There's going to be a follow-up to Renegade History of the United States, which is going to be, at that point, it was going to be, the proposal was an examination of the effects of American popular culture in the Middle East and how it has essentially dissolved the controls of Islamic republics. Sharia law gets undermined by Beyonce and TV shows and movies and all that stuff. And they said, no, we want you to do an entire history of the U.S. foreign relations, including all of the pop culture as it's been diffused across the world over the last 150 or so years. And I said, oh, well, that's a huge project. And they said, sure, but we'll do it. So this was Grove Atlantic.
Okay.
They bought the book, they bought the proposal, but they insisted that I change it so that it's this massive tome, which has taken me this long because it's so huge. I've had to learn the sort of politics and history of all these different countries, which I didn't know, and also then examine how American pop culture entered those countries and the effects it had on the politics of those countries, which is what the thesis of the book is about. So I have about 20 pages left to write.
Oh,
I'm very close, but it will be published by Grove Atlantic, which is a major publisher, commercial publisher, hopefully next year.
Well, good. Something you said there, which is kind of interesting about the Middle East and popular culture. I mean, when you look back at Iran, like in the 1970s, they don't seem to be they were much more modern. At least my understanding of it. How has that changed from going from kind of that, you look at the old footage that they had and they're wearing suits and ties and now they're, kind of digressing. Give me your understanding of that with the concept you just said.
Do you mean the Rand Corporation?
Iran, the country.
Iran. Iran. Okay, yeah.
Iran. Sorry. Hey,
whatever. I just didn't hear you. That's fine. I don't care. I don't care the pronunciation. Okay. Yes, right. So if you look at Iran before 1979, before the revolution there, and people have probably seen pictures like this, it's a very modern, cosmopolitan, very Western country, at least from what we can tell from the pictures. And, there's also testimony from people who lived there at the time. Talk to people who now live in Los Angeles who grew up in Iran, right? There's a lot of people like that. They'll tell you the same thing. And then when the Islamic Republic takes over in 79, yes, of course, they institute very puritanical Sharia law, as we all know, which was fairly effective for a while, but imposing that on a people who were already exposed to good old Western pop culture has proven to be impossible. Because if you go to Tehran now, and this is many reports of this. In fact, just last night, I was watching a video of an incredibly good rapper in Tehran who raps in Farsi, and he's like one of the best rappers out there, an incredible flow. Yeah. But you will see that women in Iran in particular are yelling at the Islamic police. There are police in Iran whose sole job is to enforce Sharia law. So they mostly go after women for, dressing inappropriately. And we have women now like cursing them out, fighting them, hitting them, spitting on them, telling them to go fuck themselves, et cetera, and throwing off their scarves and their veils and all of it. And it's wearing jeans and getting piercings and They don't care. I think it's over. I think that revolution is done. I think the Islamic Republic of Iran is essentially done. It's just a matter of time as to when it will actually officially close down. But they haven't been able to. They have not been able to make Iranians into good Islamic citizens, which is exactly the point of my book. Is that when American pop culture enters a country, this is what it always does. The communists hated it because they saw it as counter to communist discipline. The fascists in Germany and Italy hated it famously because it countered fascist discipline. And the Muslim fundamentalists, the Islamists around the world, hate it just as much now. So there's like all sorts of fatwas issued by Islamic clerics these days against things like, well, it was Madonna and Britney Spears about 20 years ago, and now it's Kim Kardashian and whoever the latest pop goddess is. Who they see rightly as a threat to their entire project, because once you have that kind of individualistic, hedonistic self-indulgence, and I don't think those things are bad, by the way, right? But those are counter to any political project, really, other than pure sort of anarchism, because all the political projects out there, all the ideologies, this is liberalism, progressivism, conservatism, fascism, communism, you name it, they all require a discipline, a social discipline. They require that the individual subsumes her identity to the community, usually the nation state, right? And one's own interests and desires are subsumed to the interests and desires of the nation state. This is what all of them ask for. This is what Joe Biden asked for. This is what Joe Stalin asked for. This is what Adolf Hitler asked for. This is what Mao and conservatives too asked for. Can
I just interject? Because what makes me think, though, is with the Muslim situation, where it's a theocratic dictatorship, your salvation has something to do with it. So is that a more difficult thing to undermine? That society, in a sense, the blue jeans took down the communists and that. But so you think the communist and a religion would be equal as far as breaking them down?
Well, I mean, communism and fascism offered salvation too. That's what they said. They didn't use the word, but that's essentially secular salvation. We will be happy. We will be blessed. We will be unified. We will be at peace. We will be prosperous. We will, we'll basically enter heaven on earth through either Nazism or communism, is exactly what they said. So I don't quite see a difference. To me, it's all religious thinking.
Okay. Yeah. Curious. You had mentioned there about music, rapper in Iran. Iran. Sorry. You had also mentioned, I think it was with James Gentleman on the Blackbird podcast, that you saw a demise in music. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how you said that. I see music as a great diversion to a lot of things we have in the world, right? And I'm way too involved in politics and listen to stuff. Do you think the demise in that has to do with anything with the political stress that we are seeing right now? Or is it just people are not thinking out of the box, and they're too, they used to be anti-establishment, and it seems like they're not anymore.
Yeah. So when I said that to James, and by the way, everyone should listen to the Blackbird podcast. I think it's just about the best libertarian podcast out there right now. I regretted it in a sense, because that was Thad, the music fan, talking, not Thaddeus Russell, the whatever I am social critic talking, because Thaddeus Russell believes that there's no such thing as bad or good music. As Miles Davis said, if it sounds good, it is good. And I think that's right. That's the relativist point of view. And I am definitely on cultural issues, I'm a relativist. I think it's absurd and always elitist and condescending to say that one form of music is better than another, but it's impossible to prove or even demonstrate in any way. You can't support that whatsoever. So I'm not, it's just, but for my ears, my taste, there's no question. And I was talking about hip hop mostly, black music, R&B and hip hop mostly, although I think it's probably true for rock as well. It sucks now. I mean, I was a hip hop fan until about 10 years ago, and I still am, but I just don't like almost any of the new stuff. And I think it is substantially qualitatively different. Now, that doesn't mean it's worse. From my ears, it's worse, but obviously it's not worse for most people, because that stuff is incredibly popular. In fact, when I see people playing new trap music songs on their, out of their cars or whatever, I really pause and I think, do you really like that? There's a tremendous dumbing down of hip hop that's gone on, and it's funny to say that about hip hop, because that was one of the major criticisms of it back in the golden age in the 90s and 2000s when hip hop was so great. But my God, if you compare the lyrics today of the top 10 hip hop songs to the lyrics of the top 10 hip hop songs from 1990, whatever, it's embarrassing. Because I mean, even like DMX, you know, who was basically like relatively a sort of a knucklehead rapper. I mean, you listen to his song, he tells stories. He tells stories with a narrative arc, and with, you know, and he rhymes throughout it. And it's actually, you know, a major piece of writing. And nowadays it's well, we know it's mumble rap, and there's no story, and there's not much rhyming, and there's a lot of cursing, and I mean it's mostly cursing, and it's basically nigga bitch, nigga bitch, nigga bitch, suck my dick. I mean, sometimes that's actually the chant. They'll chant that, you know. So okay, if you like that and prefer it, there's nothing I have to say to you. You can't be wrong. But if you don't like that stuff, let's have a conversation about it.
Right.
And why that is. So is it because of politics, the decline in the according to my taste, quality of rap in the last 10 or 15 years? I don't know what it's about. I mean, this is a generational thing, you know. It's very much about Clint Russell, best rapper alive.
Sorry, I'm not going to put many comments up there, but that one was.
This is like serious libertarian in jokes here.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Clint is a good friend, so I will have no comment.
Same here.
Clint's a very good guy. Yeah, it's sort of it's about what's happening with millennials, and especially Zoomers. My son's generation, he's 20 now, and you know, he listens to trap music, and he has for years, and I would always tease him about it and express bewilderment at it, and I would try to introduce him to older stuff, and he would reject it usually, although he loves 50 Cent for some reason. I think it's tricky to talk generational politics because that may not even be a thing, you know, but it does seem to me that people under the age of 40, and especially people under the age of 30 these days in the United States, have very different taste in stuff than we do, and also a very different sensibility. And in particular, I guess, boy, I get so confused on this stuff because if people know my work from way back in the day, I sort of started out critiquing the Puritan work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
I was known as that guy. I was the guy who went after the Puritan work ethic. And
is this why you were late to the podcast today?
Stupid. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Work is bad. Well, so let's be clear here. I mean, work in itself is a good thing. That's the Puritan work ethic. That's ridiculous. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Not work to accomplish something like being on time for a podcast interview. That's just being a lazy piece of shit. You know? But if you and it's not good. So, no, it's work in itself. So DMX put a lot of work into every one of his songs. The Tyler, the Creator, not him. Travis Scott seems not to. And you know, when you put work into art, it's often better. Not always. Right. You know, I think you can produce a lot of the greatest songs of all time were written in 5 or 10 minutes. But I don't know. There seems to be also a depression in that generation. The SSRIs may have something to do with it. All the drugs they're taking. Hang
on, you got muted here somehow.
I didn't do nothing.
It sounds like a switch from your mic to your camera, maybe.
What just happened here?
Your audio, maybe, is your camera audio
thing. Anyway, it should be better now. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we all know that the economic prospects of the younger generations are much worse than the prospects for my generation and for the boomers. That certainly may have something to do with it. There's a despair, I think, and a depression in the mood of younger people that I have not seen among Gen Xers, certainly.
Yeah.
We hustled, you know. I mean, that was kind of a given in our generation. People did not live at home after the high school. They got out immediately. They would either go to college or they would start working, and people just hustled. And you just didn't see this sort of widespread quitting, in a sense, on the economy, on the future, on making oneself better. But that's partly because they have so few prospects. They can't own a house. Jobs are scarce, et cetera, et cetera. So,
you had also, once again, I just had listened to the James one. So you had made another comment in there, and then I heard you on the next show. And so I just wanted to bring this up, which is kind of the change. It sounds like the change in the structure of Renegade University and Unregistered Academy. What's the actual situation there? And if you can enlighten us on that, or at least me.
Yeah. So I'm no longer working with Renegade University. I am now entirely.
You started that, right?
Yeah, I started it, but for various reasons I can't go into. I'm just leaving.
Okay.
I have left it, and I'm doing everything. All my content creation is now on Patreon under Unregistered, and the school is now Unregistered Academy. So it's the same stuff. I'm teaching courses constantly. Right now I'm teaching a course on World War II, which is really popular. But it's all under Unregistered Academy at patreon.com/unregistered.
Okay, that's good to know. Let me play you this. I don't know if you ever, there's problems in the LP, right? The Mises Caucus took over, and then the LP, the people have left. They've had problems. There's these gentlemen that went on this neoliberal podcast, and I want to play you this. Let's see if I could find this one here. Okay, so I'm going to play you this clip here. And they talk about some problems, but one of the things they bring up, I think, is something you have, something we could talk about. So make sure you can let me know if you can't hear this.
As articles that offer these weird, soft-pedaled defenses of Hitler in the 19th.
I should probably this is from the Mises Caucus website. There's an article about rethinking World War II. So that's what he's referencing there.
But who wrote that article?
Vance. I'll find it when we're going here.
Okay, I need that.
To be a great man like Otto von Bismarck or whatever. Their preferred presidential candidate, a comic named Dave Smith, is basically an open white nationalist who says it's a scientific fact that blacks are genetically less intelligent than other races. He uses transphobic slurs that I'm not going to repeat here, but he basically says all trans people are liars. Their identity is a lie, and he calls them the slur that you're probably thinking of. He goes around with a list of who's who on the alt-right, like Stefan Molyneux and Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer and Gavin McInnes and all the podcast alt-right that you're probably thinking of. So there's real like open white nationalism here and just bigotry of all kinds. And this is the group that we're talking about, right? It's not just, some libertarians think that it's really weird how woke people are. I feel like that complaining about wokeism is almost like the hook, and that's how they get you. And then they start trying to get people into the darker stuff.
Okay, so
let me say, sorry, before we.
No,
so even if Dave said all of that, if he said all of that, that is still not white nationalism.
No.
My God. Okay, now did he say? I don't know, Tyler. Did he say any of that in any way?
Obviously, it was a gross misstatement of anything. He had said something about trans, like why focus on them when there's so many other big problems out there in the world. The black one I couldn't find. I could only imagine that it was some sort of Legion of Skanks jokes that he's done. The one I kind of, first of all, there's a few things. There's one about taking on your opponents by just name calling to such degrees that you don't have to associate or have conversations with them anymore, right? And I think maybe you can give us a historical perspective of how this has come about. The other one was, and I'll give it here. It's Rethinking the Good War, Lawrence M. Vance, and he wrote it for the Mises Institute. What I got out of that was you had talked about, and once again, James Gentleman's podcast about blowback with World War II, and I think it's exactly what this article was referencing. There's nothing, soft pedaling Hitler. So a few things. Talking about this kind of Marxist commentary in a sense where you're demonizing everybody to the point where they can't even respond, or they're just irreputes, and also the World War II stuff.
Well, I mean, this is all about the split in the LP between the Mises Caucus people and whoever it was who was running the LP before then, who have never had any base anywhere. I mean, the leaders of the LP like never appeared on any of the podcasts I ever knew about, or they had I saw no support for that faction. And I think it's really just a handful of people who controlled the party because no one else cared about it. But so, all right, I mean, the the LP led by Sarwark, and I want to say,
and you don't have to commentate about the LP itself. I'm not really concerned about what you think about them.
Well, no, I was going to say that.
Feel free to do whatever.
Yeah. I mean, they're liberals, basically. I mean, they're essentially progressives who might like capitalism or something, but they're very much woke. Nicholas Sarwark, I just got to say this because I've said it before publicly, but I got to say it again because I can't believe it. Nicholas Sarwark, this was about a year and a half ago. I tweeted about Daniel Shaver, who was murdered by the Mesa police in Arizona. I'm sure everybody listening knows about this very well and has seen the video. And I asked on Twitter, I said on Twitter that there was no media coverage of the killing of Daniel Shaver, when of course there was massive, overwhelming 24/7 media coverage every time a black person gets killed by the cops. And Nicholas Sarwark took it upon himself to correct me and show me that there actually were 2 local newspaper reports about Danny Shaver getting shot to death by the cops on his hands and knees. And then he argued with me back and forth about how that was sufficient coverage, and he wouldn't answer my questions. Is that sufficient, Nicholas? Is that good enough for you? That should there have been more media coverage of this? He didn't answer me. He didn't answer me. He did not say that there should have been more. That national media should have covered it, etc. No, nothing. I mean, right after that, I didn't know anything about the guy at the time, but I was so horrified. I actually went to the Mises Caucus. Mises Caucus invited me to give a talk at the California LP convention last year in the summer, and people can watch this online. I give a whole spiel about this episode with Sarwark and that speech. I was just, I couldn't believe it. But I started to hear that he might have been a Fed, and I thought, yeah, to say something like that as the national chair of the Libertarian Party, that's as anti-libertarian as one can be. So if you're going to take down the LP, who's better to lead it than Nicholas Sarwark? So they are cultural liberals who have just lost to, or were losing to, people who are not cultural liberals. And by the way, I am on cultural stuff. I am neither with Sarwark nor with the Mises Caucus. There are a few people in the Mises Caucus. I think Angela is probably with me on most things. But I'm thinking through, I mean, the sort of people I know of in the Mises Caucus who are the leaders of it, all of whom I know well, we differ. I mean, a lot of them are basically much more culturally conservative than I am. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I have never heard any of them talking about passing laws, censoring things, or, putting people in jail for consensual activities or whatever. So I'm not terribly concerned about that. I would be nice if they saw things like I did, but they don't need to. And I'm still going to support them so long as they never call for the state to do anything against people for doing consensual activities. So that's what it's about. It's about these core cultural issues, which is interesting because there was no fight. I mean, the losing faction of the LP, you may have noticed, never talks about economics. Right. Never talks about the state. They don't criticize the Mises people for the major issues of libertarianism. The main stuff that the Mises people talk about is about economics and the state, public policy, all that good stuff. They rarely talk about cultural issues. In fact, they're forced to because it's demanded of them that they do talk about it. And when they do, they're not into it. They're not into the program that's been laid out by the woke regime.
As a matter of fact, in that interview, one of the guys' critiques was, I don't see Mises talking about woke stuff, but that's kind of the point of not discussing the woke stuff. It's about the utilitarian theory or whatever you're talking about, economics. Yeah. So anyway, continue on.
Yeah. I mean, so to me, it's and their changes to the party platform, I had zero problem with. I thought the thing about bigotry was bullshit to begin with. Not bullshit. It was worse than that. It's coercive. And I think there's better reasons for opposing that than what I've heard from the Mises people. It's virtue signaling. They don't define bigotry. If they define bigotry, I might be okay with that. But to say bigotry is not allowed, I'm a bigot, goddammit. I hate all sorts of things in the world. I hate a lot of things and a lot of people, and I even hate cultures. There's cultures that I fucking hate, Tyler. There's even, there's even national cultures that I hate. Okay.
Oh my.
Or at least seriously dislike. Don't we? Are they all the same to us? Is Russian and Chinese and American and Salvadoran culture all the same to us? No, of course not.
And if you get involved in those cultures, you realize that they're probably even more bigoted about other cultures than we are.
Oh, by far, of course. I mean, Jesus Christ, Hotep Jesus said this to me. You know, white Americans are probably the least racist people on the planet, and I think he's right. I think he's right. So yeah, that stuff sucks. Fuck it. I'm over it. I've been over it from the beginning. I've been criticizing that shit since before a lot of people were born. So, you know, but at the same time, I'm a cultural radical too. So it's odd. My renegade politics about culture is also not. It's neither the progressive woke stuff at all, nor is it the cultural conservatism that I think is fairly prominent in the Mises Caucus. But,
yeah, and it's what I enjoy about your. Okay, so maybe talk to us real quick about the blowback theory and why that means you are specifically pertaining to World War II and Hitler, and why you're such a big fan of Hitler as a result.
Yeah, why I want to create a National Socialist America.
Right.
Yeah, and we need a strong leader named Thad who will have unilateral power to do anything, which, you know, might not be a bad idea, actually. We might want to consider that. We'd certainly have more fun. Blowback. So you want the whole story about World War II?
No, just kind of the overview of why this guy, you know, it's similar to Ukraine, right? Where you can't say something that you're not for it and that it's maybe not a good idea without the opposition saying you're a toady for, you know, Putin or whatever.
Okay, so there's two forms of blowback with World War II. One is the one that a lot of people know about. I'm sure all your listeners know about, which is that Hitler was essentially created by Versailles, by the Versailles Treaty, by the outcome of World War I, in which major portions of Germany were taken from Germany and given over to other countries. Right. Which, by the way, people need to know this. In Germany, this was universally hated, and this was communists and Nazis agreed on this. This is the one thing they agreed on, was that the Versailles Treaty was an abomination and was absolutely unjust to the German people, and that those territories needed to be rejoined with Germany. You know, overnight, people who were German, who identified as German, who spoke German, were suddenly Czech or Polish citizens, or under the control of the British and the French. What? Why? You know, without their say at all. Imagine that, right? Imagine that all of a sudden you're a citizen of Mexico. What? Like, okay. It's worse than that though, because you're now a citizen of a country that thinks you are biologically evil, which, remember, anti-German racism is a thing. It's a real thing. We are now seeing anti-Russian racism. Real anti-Russian racism is totally common and acceptable and fine. They're banning all Russians from activities, right? All Russians. If you're just born in the goddamn country, you're considered to be somehow evil. What? That's racism. So there was plenty of anti-German racism. So these people were suddenly in countries that were controlled by anti-German racists. On top of that, not just dislocated, separated from their families and their communities, but they're now living in a world in which they're pariahs. So that gave Hitler fertile ground to build a movement in, right? Very easy to recruit people who believe that Germany is a great nation and should be reconstituted. So that's that blowback. What the Allies did caused Hitler, the rise of Hitler, or at least partly caused it. What I'm arguing is different, which is that the way the United States entered and conducted the war caused many, many, many of the deaths, probably more than half of the deaths in World War II total. So right now, historians estimate that the total death toll of World War II is about 65 million. And I believe more than half of that would not have happened if the United States had not entered the war the way that it did. And U.S. entry into the war, it made two regional wars, which were vicious and horrible and bloody, no question about it. The war between Japan and China, and the war between Germany and Poland and Russia. Those were real wars that the United States did not cause, had really very little to do with. It's not our fault, not the Americans' fault, those wars, but they were regional. They were limited in scope, and the ambitions of the Japanese Empire and the ambitions of Hitler were limited. Neither one wanted to do anything more than that. They wanted to take part of China for the resources, and the Nazis wanted to take Poland and Russia for these weird racial ideas. Now that both those were, as I said, the invasion of those countries by those empires were absolutely murderous, killed millions of people for that. But there was no reason for it to expand beyond that, beyond those wars. And that's what the US did with the urging of Churchill and Britain, for sure. They wanted to make it into a global conflict because the United States, the Americans who were at the center of power in the FDR White House, the foreign policy establishment at that time, made it very clear that they needed the United States to emerge from that conflict, from the war, as the undisputed global hegemon, the superpower that we know and love today. And that's what they got. So to do that, it had to be a global conflict, and they had to absolutely destroy those two regimes, because those two regimes were not interested in doing business, doing trade with the United States, and that was not possible, not allowed by the liberal establishment at the time, that wanted a global economy that was managed by the United States. So you couldn't have what was called autarky, self-sufficiency, anywhere in the world. It had to be a global economy that had nominal free trade, but that was actually tightly managed by the United States, which was the dominant partner in any trade deal, right? So that's why they went in full force. That's why the United States built the biggest military in the history of the world and then deployed it against those two regimes, annihilated every bit of it, literally killed every leader in the Nazi regime and in Imperial Japan, took control of those countries entirely, took control of those regions entirely. If you take control of Central Europe and South Asia and Eastern and Southeast Asia, you're going to control basically the entire world economy. And that's what the United States did. And that's why they went in. They created all those bombs and tanks and bullets and missiles, killed tens of millions of people, I believe needlessly, because neither one of those regimes wanted to expand outside those spheres. And so the only reason we went to war in World War II was to create the global superpower, was to create the global American empire that many of us now don't want. But that's the origin of it, is in World War II, 1941, the decisions that were made then. And there's much more to be said about that. We can talk about the Holocaust, the direct relationship between U.S. entry into the war and the Holocaust. My thesis is that the U.S. entry into the war necessitated the fulfillment of the Holocaust. The Nazis' policy on the Jews was very clear throughout, from 1933 until the fall of 1941. It was emigration, emigration, emigration. They did not want to kill the Jews because they believed that's what inferior anti-Semites did, like the Russians did. The Russians had pogroms where they should have killed Jews spontaneously. It was anarchic, chaotic. And what did it result in? Hitler said it resulted in the Bolshevik Revolution. When you just murder Jews in the street, what you get is communism. And he was right. And so he said, no, we have to orderly march them out of the country. And that's a German way to go. He called that the anti-Semitism of reason. And he said to the West, for every single year, for more than 10 years, every single year, he would get up on stage and give these big speeches to television cameras intended for the West. And he said to the West, I will send you the Jews that we have on our own boats if you will take them. And the West, the United States and Britain and France said, no, we're not taking any Jewish refugees. People don't know this, but the United States took no significant number of Jewish refugees from the Third Reich from 1933 until Hitler was dead in 1945. All the way through the Holocaust, all the way through the war and the Holocaust and the Nazi regime. No Jews were allowed into this country, or Britain or France or anywhere else, really. He said also, if you don't take the Jews, which they didn't do, if you don't take the Jews and you stop me from expanding into Poland, from taking our territory that belonged to us in Poland and Czechoslovakia and Russia militarily, then I will kill them. So he called them hostages. He said, we were holding them as hostages to stop the West from intervening against us. If you intervene against us militarily, I will kill the Jews. I will not kill them unless you do that. He said that over and over again, but I will also hand them to you if you just take them. And at that time, the United States had a population of about 110 million people, less than half of what we have now. So there was plenty of room for the 500,000 Jews who lived in Germany at the time. We didn't take any of them. So FDR forces Japan to attack Pearl Harbor, thus entering the war. Germany declares war on the United States. U.S. declares war on Germany. At that point, the U.S. had already been furnishing major weapons to the Allies to fight Germany. So the U.S. was already effectively at war. Hitler at that point knew he was a dead man, that once the might, the economic and military might of the U.S. was deployed against him, he had no chance of surviving this. And so he said, fuck it. Okay, I gave you warnings. I told you many, many times what I would do if you did this. So that's when the Holocaust began, the day after the declaration of war on Germany by the United States. was the first gassing of Jews in a concentration camp, a death camp, which was in Chelmno in Poland. The day after was the first time they gassed Jews. So I think there is a direct causal link between the two, between U.S. entry into the war and what we know as the Holocaust.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you don't have to make up egregious stories to show that Hitler is obviously a bad guy, which, you know, we end up doing to try to perpetuate it, to make it look like it's a noble war or whatever.
Right.
Question for you. Do you know who Jeff and Michael Shara are? Okay, well, I'm going to say it real quick. So Michael Shara, he wrote, I think it was The Damn Yankees, and then he writes the book Killer Angels about Gettysburg. Okay, he's going to write this trilogy, and he ends up dying, and someone says to his son, who's just a gemstone guy, hey, maybe you can write the rest of it. So he ends up writing Gods and Angels. Gods and Generals, and their whole trilogy. He finishes it off and writes a bunch more. Point is, they're writing historical novels in a sense. So it's the actual events that happen, yet there's conversation. It's written like a novel. Are you familiar with this kind of historical books? Obviously, you would be. What do you think about that way of like disseminating history in kind of a historical novel sense as compared to what you're doing?
That's a hard question for me to answer because as a good postmodernist, I believe that in a sense, everything is either fiction or nonfiction, that there's no that my book, which is in terms of the methodology, is a very standard methodology, very standard history. I mean, I use evidence, right? Numbers and dates and quotes to support my arguments versus historical fiction, where they make up essentially everything, or at least they base the narrative on what we call facts, but then elaborate on them in ways that are fictional. I don't think my book is any closer to the truth than historical fiction is. I don't. I think it's closer maybe to what one might surmise given the evidence that we count as being important and valid. But there are ways to think about the past that are not rooted in the evidence that I think can help us understand them better, and give us a new understanding of them. So I have no problem with historical fiction. I tend not to be interested in it because I'm very hard-headed and old-fashioned, actually. I'm really not a postmodernist when it comes to history. I just don't do it like that. But I have no problem with it. I do think that it is essentially a meditation by the author on the psychology of great historical actors. And I think that's where it's most useful. They are attempting to psychoanalyze, essentially, the great historical actors. And I think that's a wonderful exercise. It may be bullshit. It may be wrong. It may be useless, but it can also be very, very illuminating. But that's really what they're trying to do. And I'm also famously interested in psychoanalysis of political actors. So go for it. I think there's good historical fiction and not so good historical fiction, but I think it's all a worthy attempt. Okay.
I have another clip I'm going to play for you here. Sure. This is from the Reason Roundtable, and this was just the other day. Now, I got a specific reason for this, of playing this for you. So here we go.
It was written in 1980. I think she died shortly thereafter, maybe 83, 85, something like that. So this is fairly late in her life. Someone is trying to adapt the book Anthem, and she writes, I'm glad to hear there are young Randians in Hawaii, but you make a mistake in associating the libertarians with me. They are my enemies and have nothing to do with my philosophy except for occasional attempts to plagiarize it. And then she says, the reason for my disapproval of this adaptation is that I cannot stand the thought of someone monkeying around with my material. My work means too much to me. If you remember the climax of The Fountainhead, I'm sure you will understand this. So this is basically Ayn Rand responding to fan mail by telling all libertarians to go kick rocks, and also sort of vaguely threatening maybe to bomb an adaptation of Anthem in Hawaii. Every letter is like this. She is the most intense correspondent you could possibly imagine.
Okay, so my reason for giving you that clip there is basically I've heard. Okay, so Ayn Rand, to give you the backstory, you probably got it there. She's writing, complaining about someone kind of repurposing her work or not using it in the way that she is solely focused on. So I've heard you previously talk about Glenn Beck, who has ranted and raved about your book, and you're not too excited about that. So what is your, at least at the time, you maybe you didn't like Glenn Beck. So how do you feel about someone, and even on your dust cover, I think had a quote by Michael Michael Medved, who probably is much different than you as well. How do you feel about people kind of taking your ideas and perpetuating them and where you might not always feel comfortable about it? And by the way, my greatest interview, Hope, would be you and Glenn Beck, because I don't know if you've actually heard him recently, or I've followed him quite along. I think he's very much open-minded to having a conversation. So that would be my wet dream interview, by the way. So
me too. I would love. So when the book came out, when Renegade came out, that was 2010. And that's when Glenn Beck had taken a turn recently at that point toward looking at progressivism, the history of progressivism as the roots of all the problems in current society. And at that point, I thought he was sort of half right. He was on the right track, but he just wasn't trained in this and he didn't know the history very well. And so he was kind of like stumbling about there. But boy, since then, Glenn Beck has gotten very, very smart. And every time I see him nowadays, I don't really follow him, but I see him fairly often, clips and stuff. I've had friends on his show who've told me about it. He's tremendous. He's great. He's doing really good work. And I agree with him most of the time. I mean, he had Cody. Everyone should watch Cody Wilson's interview with him. Cody's up there talking about Foucault and gun rights and the end of gun control and the profound meaning of 3D printed guns. And Beck is right with him. I mean, this is very heady stuff. Cody's a serious intellectual, and Beck was right there. And Cody's extremely radical too. So I'd love to do Glenn Beck. I love that he read the book and he liked it. He wanted me on the show for a minute there. And
then he did Michael his research.
Michael Medved is a very classic sort of cultural conservative, but I was on his show and he somehow liked it. He got really amazing. Like I have tremendous respect for people who can do that. And that's, again, what I try to do on my show, right? It's like I've had most of the people on my show I disagree with fundamentally about politics, even libertarians. But to respect their ideas and to take them seriously, and to seriously examine and analyze them rather than dismiss them with an ad hominem or some insult, which is what usually happens in politics. So for someone like Michael Medved to say something good about my book, which is a celebration of whores and drunks, etc., is pretty impressive. I don't care. I want that. Mostly I want lefties. It was really written for the left in a sense.
So why did these two right wingers, in a sense, and there might have been obviously more, gravitate to your book? What was it about it that they liked? Was it just the honesty?
I think it was mostly because I put the lie to progressive history. So the book is there's a whole chapter devoted to explaining how FDR and the New Deal were very closely related to Nazism and fascism. They love that, of course. Yeah. The whole mythology about slavery being one system of, this long unbroken history of oppression and victimhood, which is wrong. They like that. Then again, I start the book with a total denunciation of the founding fathers, showing them to be prudes and puritanical do-gooders and imperialists as well. That's the new book. I'm showing how they were imperialists from the beginning. So I don't know. I mean, these are just good intellectuals. That's all I can say. I think Medved and Beck are just good, solid intellectuals that I wish we had more of. I don't even care what your political ideology is, as long as you're open to ideas. That's right. What I care about only. Well, it's curiosity.
And we started this podcast, and that was exactly what I loved about your podcast. There's some of them I'm like, I don't want to hear that one, and then some of them I've started and like I'm not interested, and then I was captivated. So part of that's your interview style of kind of being a psychiatrist or psychologist, of digging down into people's, it reminds me, me as a libertarian, I always like to find the root of the problem rather than, saying, hey, college education is too high, let's forgive it. How about we go back to the original problem, why it's that way? And that's kind of your questions of digging down there. One other thing, I don't know if it's your contemporary, but David Horowitz, the famous lefty, Ramparts, grew up in Berkeley, and kind of that's where you were at the time. I was a big fan and loved his book, Radical Sun, which kind of reminded me of a part 2 version of Whittaker Chambers' Witness, of coming from the hard left, moving over, and then he got disenfranchised with the Black Panthers and Betty, his secretary that was killed by them. The right loves to glom onto people that have converted, in a sense, that really knock that. Have you found yourself, obviously the 2 people we just mentioned there, but kind of the right courting you in a sense because you've left the left?
Yeah. So quick aside, I went to high school with David Horowitz's son, Ben.
Oh,
and
okay.
Ben Horowitz is the Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the biggest VC firms in the world. And Mark Andreessen has asked to be on my show. But so,
I think he was just on Malice's show.
Yeah, he's done doing media now. Yeah. But yeah, Ben Horowitz. Yeah. So I knew Ben in high school. But David Horowitz's father, as you said, was this Berkeley lefty who then became a right winger and became sort of an anti-lefty, famously. So the right wing and I have had an interesting relationship, and I think it's more strained now because the right wing in recent months has taken a hard right turn on cultural issues, or at least started to pay attention to cultural issues. And I don't like what they're doing at all.
Okay.
I think it's basically homophobia dressed up as other stuff. Just really old school cultural conservatism that I thought was dead and gone, but apparently it's making a revival. I mean, the Texas GOP platform calling homosexuality abnormal. Oh, whoa, what year is this, guys? And even though I completely agree with them about the left indoctrinating kids into gender ideology in schools, I think that's going on, and I think it's terrible. I think the left indoctrinates kids into all sorts of things, though. I think it's all bad. I don't think the left is trying to have sex with children, but I do think that they are indoctrinating them into this whole worldview, which is doing that, I think, is grotesque. But so the right is hung up on this. They're fixated on this thing right now, and I'm not into it. And so and they're not into me nowadays, or less so. Well, that's not really true. They're still pretty friendly to me, but we'll see. I don't know. We'll see if they hold on to this whole drag queen hysteria. If they continue thinking the drag queens are the root of all evil, or that they're evil at all, we're not going to have a good time, because people don't know this, but this is true. I'm the leading historian of Black drag queens. I wrote my first scholarly journal article, my only scholarly journal, peer-reviewed article, academic article, is a long treatise on Black drag queens in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and the relationship with the civil rights movement, which was not a good relationship. And I also am very close with the production company that created RuPaul and RuPaul's Drag Race. This is World of Wonder, so I know those guys. I'm not gay, and I don't even like drag shows very much, but politically, and I'm going to write about this. Politically, drag has been very, very liberatory in many, many ways. I think less so nowadays, but certainly in its origins it was. And we can talk about that later. But anyway, so we're going to have a problem if these knucklehead conservatives keep thinking that drag queens are evil in themselves. If they're trying to indoctrinate kids, fuck yeah, shut them down. But most of them are not.
So I have a pretty niche podcast, right? Libertarian podcast review, and you outdid me with Black drag queens. That's maybe even more. Now, my whole thing with and I don't want to necessarily get it. You've been on. Clint Russell had you on talking about age of consent. Malice had you on. You've had a show. You had that guy on there that did the whole documentary, I think, about age of consent. People can go check that out. I'm not that interested in that. My thing on a lot of this is parents, right? The drag queen, and you're taking your kid. Parents control the situation as best you can, and it's on you in that sense. So that's kind of my theory there.
Me too.
I just went and saw Maverick, Top Gun movie, over the weekend, and it was fantastic. If people want to go see it, that's my view of that one. I know the libertarian and the anti-war, sometimes they're like, hey, this is propaganda, but I'm seeing it. And my sister sent me a text because she had just gone, and she's like, hey, we saw this movie. It was fantastic. It wasn't woke and didn't preach to us. And I had the same feeling coming out of there too. First of all, the enemy they never said who it was. It was just enemy, some NATO violation of something or other. So they were going after this. Now, it reminded me, first of all, of kind of when Star Wars came out in the late 70s, where you'd had this malaise of Logan's Run, Space Odyssey 2001, a bunch of these movies that were just dark and dour, and suddenly you had Star Wars, which was good guy, bad guy, positive, right? So I feel like we're kind of starting that kind of process. Maybe this is a movie that does it, but is it okay as anti-war person to go to a movie like this and just enjoy it for what it is and not feel that you're being propagandized to?
So I am two things. I am a lifelong anti-war activist. When I was a lefty growing up, I was anti-war. And since I've stopped being a lefty, I've been even more anti-war. It is the number one issue for me. It always has been, probably always will be. I think it's the most important thing in politics. I wish everybody cared about it as much as I did. I wish everybody were Scott Horton. But we're not. So that's one thing I am. The other thing I am is a lifelong lover of war movies. Uh-oh. What do we do with that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and my son, you know, he knows my politics. He basically shares a lot of my politics, but he and I, that's one of the things we do. We watch war movies. We love them. I mean, I'm talking about anyone that has good production values. I don't care what the politics are. If the production values are good, I'm down. What do you do with that? Well, it's a real problem because Hollywood's, or I should say the Pentagon's control of Hollywood probably is the major foundational support for U.S. foreign policy, because that's how they recruit soldiers. That's how they staff the military to do what they do. It's also how they maintain sort of this broad tacit support for the military and the Pentagon and the empire. People don't question it because those are our heroes.
Yeah.
In the movies. Well, I mean, if you go and watch Top Gun or some movie of, or Sniper, American Sniper, which that one I did not like because that was just incredibly psychotic, mass murder dressed up as glory. I still can't get over that one, but most of them I don't feel that way about. If you come away with it, if you enjoy the entertainment value, or video games, I mean, fucking Call of Duty, holy God. I mean, Call of Duty is probably responsible for, the existence of NATO now, the maintenance of NATO. If you watch those things or play those games and maintain a critique of them, we're good. We're fine. It's like comedy. It's like stand-up comedy, right? Lots of comics say stuff that we don't like, that's offensive.
Right.
Politically offensive, and it doesn't matter what your politics are. Well, but you can still laugh at it. You can still think it's funny and it can make you think. If you hear a comic make a racist joke and then become a racist, you're an idiot. If you hear a comic make a racist joke and you laugh, but you also know that racism is not okay or not a good idea, then we're fine. And I think that's what most of stand-up comedy was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's what we did. We went to see these stand-up comics perform. They would say jokes that now would be considered racist. We might have considered them somewhat racist. They were somewhat racist, but they were jokes. It was entertainment. And so we didn't take it seriously, and it certainly didn't make us change our minds about, the biological inferiority of black people or whatever it is.
Right.
So I'd say the same thing for war movies. Have your critical mind during and after, and you're fine. Don't feel guilty about enjoying it. It's fun to watch people blow up stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. I had mentioned how it came from the right. Kind of the last little bastion of righthood was, for me, to let go of was the anti-war thing. And by the way, I think the right and the left right now, they're anti-war when their guy is not in power. That's to me, that's kind of the semblance that you see of it. But I was able to, like I said, Murray Rothbard and some of the right way to think about some of these things really helped me. I didn't have to be a communist sympathizer, and I could do that. Mm-hmm. What's something, since you've moved away from the harder left, what's one of the last things that you held on to, principles in a sense, or guiding lights that the left may have had that you've either kept, and besides war, something that maybe that is more seen with that other side that you actually had a hard time giving up?
Well, I mean, I was going to say anti-racism, but the anti-racism, what's called anti-racism now is totalitarian bullshit now. Non-racism, I would say, is a left-wing value too, maybe, or maybe that's actually conservative value. I don't know, but or put it this way, the disinterest in racism is a left-wing value for sure that I've carried over. Feminism. I was thinking about this today, people forget that women didn't have property rights until the 1960s in most states.
Yeah.
They forget that women in the professions were treated like shit. Until very recently. That it was impossible to enter many of the professions until very recently.
Right.
Now they're taking over. I know they're taking over the colleges. They're taking over many of the professions. I know. But that's all very new. And so, like, my mother grew up. She got an abortion in Mexico in the 60s because it was illegal in the United States. Now, many people listening to this will think that was a good thing. I don't. But that's another value I carry over. I'm pro-choice, although I'm totally sympathetic to the argument that it is murder. It's just that we can't ever prove it one way or the other. We can't. And so until I see real evidence that convinces me that it's murder, I'm going to be pro-choice. But I totally respect, I respect completely people's opposition to it on the grounds that it's murder. And by the way, I was literally never told that was the argument against abortion by the right. It was always anti-woman. It was always misogyny. That's what we were told it was about. No one ever said to me, oh, they think it's murder. And I was like, huh, well, you think it's murder. Like, how can you prove it's not murder? I also can't prove it's not murder. But anyway, so those are values that I still carry over. I would say this, though. I think maybe the most important thing for me is what I would call cosmopolitanism. And so I'm an anti-globalist, right? So the sort of MAGA right-wing critique of globalism, I believe 100%, I am 100% with them. 100% with them on that. Take down NATO, take down the EU. I'm pro-Brexit. Every single globalist, the United Nations, NATO, all of it, go. I'm with them on that. But I'm also a cosmopolitan. I'm not sure they are. The United States is a good place to live. I'm really glad I was born here, but there's a lot of stuff in the rest of the world that I love just as much. And I love traveling. I love being in a very diverse world. I live in Oakland, which is full of lunatic commies, but it also is full of people from all over the world who are not lunatic commies, by the way. They're immigrants who are working hard and building businesses and creating businesses and all that stuff. And I love that. I lived in Oregon for a little while, for a couple of years, and I hated the fact that everybody was white. I really did. Not because of some bullshit left-wing, like, white people suck ideology. It's just boring. Like, if I lived in China, I'd be bored too, where everybody's Chinese, or Japan, same thing. So that kind of diversity, I do think, is really good and important for me. I'm not saying everyone should like it. If you want to live in a white nationalist commune in Idaho, go for it. I will protect your right to do that. But it's just not me. I'm not into it. So cosmopolitanism is a very left-wing sensibility, I would say. You don't find it as much among conservatives, and you do find it much more among liberals and leftists. And that's the one thing about liberals I like. They spend summers in France. And that's because they're rich. But I mean, right. But they're also interested in other cultures, other nations, and other countries. So yeah.
So we'll close it up here, but I just thought of one last thing I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned the word misogyny, and to me now, I think trans is a big issue, and in sports, right? And it feels like to me, I do cycling, and there's many people out there that are very woke within the cycling world who push men to be able to race with women, biological in the sports, and it feels like to me that's the ultimate misogynist. Am I incorrect? Unintentional, maybe.
I spent about a half an hour with Joe Rogan going over this. I
remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
You guys diverted from the kind of wispy man to the big bodybuilder, and that there's a gradations in between.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean I hate what's going on. I hate that these trans people are taking over women's sports and dominate. It's disgusting. I mean, it's really disgusting. I also think that it's utterly legitimate to believe that you are of a gender that you were not assigned. But if you're born with that kind of body, it's just obvious that you have an advantage in a sport. So, the worst thing, which is what Joe gets pissed off about most, and I'm just as furious about it because I'm a martial artist too, is Fallon Fox, the trans woman who broke the jaw of a woman he fought with and almost killed another, I think. But so I said on Rogan, I said, look, why don't we, instead of having just weight divisions, instead of just dividing the sports by sex or gender, divide it by what really matters. Because if I'm going to, I don't want to fight like a 6'2" muscled woman, which they exist, who's really skilled. She'll kick my fucking ass. But I'd love to fight a 5'2" guy who's, half my size and has no skills. That'd be no problem. right? So what matters to me is the length of your arms, the height of your body, your muscle mass, your fast twitch muscles, all the things that go into athleticism, right? That matter in athleticism and athletics. So have it by that, have it by those categories instead of by just this arbitrary thing called gender. It's bullshit, right? So that's what I'd say. But yeah, I'm completely with you. I think there needs to be some separation of those types of bodies from other types of bodies if you're going to compete together. It's all a social construct. I'm talking as a postmodernist now. Of course, to me, everything's a social construct. But like, if you're going to play a game, you got to follow the rules of the game, or there's no game. There's no game. So I like playing games and sports, so we follow the rules like I'm a total modernist when I'm in the game because I enjoy the fun of it. But we got to make it fair, and that's what we got to do.
Well, I appreciate it. So Thaddeus, tell everybody where they can find you, sign up with your courses, and what do you have coming up?
It's all patreon.com/unregistered. You can also go to my website, thaddeusrussell.com.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, I appreciate you once again coming in today. Thanks everybody for checking the show out. I do a Kill Tony knockoff show about once a month. We're coming up here. Andy and I are going to do it again. So people, feel free to send me your DM me. We'll send you a link. You'll come in, do your 1 minute spiel. We'll rip on you, and then you go out. So Thaddeus, once again, big fan. I appreciate you coming in. If you want to hang on a little bit, we'll do the outro, and then see you, everybody.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, I'm leaving now. Bye, guys.
But she's back.
And now.
Chick-fil-A is completely overrated. It's not that good. I prefer Zaxby's. I prefer Popeyes.
Takes a tough man to make a tender forecast, Nick. And I guess that's me. Keep fucking that chicken.
Should I vote for Dick Cheney on the Libertarian Party? Do I have an obligation to vote for Dick Cheney?
I would say so.
Yes.
Did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us.
That one dude was like, not a podcast, I can't find it anywhere, and they don't have video.
Oh, yeah, Peter Janke, yeah.
Yeah, I blocked him.
I'll do it. If he unblocks me,
He'll buy your shirt if you unblock him, Bert.
He's a wigger.
Yeah, nothing cooler than a 49-year-old wigger. I just started live streaming. Cut me some slack. I'm pretty high tech for a boomer. But anyways,
boomer.